While in North Carolina over the weekend, President Trump addressed more than just his indictment, although he spent a good deal of time on that, calling the level of derangement syndrome as having reached new heights.
You're watching Joe Biden try to jail his leading political opponent. Think of it. This is like third world country stuff. Trying to put his opponent, who's leading him by a lot, wants to put him in jail over following a civil act. This is a simple thing. The Presidential Records Act, it's all under the Presidential Records Act, as it should be. It's all under the Clinton Sox case. You know what this Clinton Sox case is? That's where they sued Clinton, and he ended up winning, that he could keep the things that we're talking about. It's all under that, Mr. Congressman. We discussed that before. But this is more like Stalinist Russia or Communist China that we're dealing with. These people have reached a level of Trump derangement syndrome that nobody thought was possible.
And after getting through with that portion of the program, he also did make mention of some geopolitical matters, that he is the only one who could stop World War III. He's the only one, as president, to sort of approve of, who got anything out of the Chinese communists.
I stood up to China like no administration has ever done before, bringing hundreds of billions of dollars pouring into our treasury from China when no other president had gotten anything from China. They never got anything. They got a lot of bullshit. That's what they got. I know.
No more bull jive. Re-elect President Trump. Dakota Wood joins us. He served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He's Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
It's great to be with you every Monday. Thanks so much.
Before we get to the headliner, of course, the indictment, the matter of Chi-Com policy and the difference between the Trump administration and the current one, the difference between Trump's posture and any of the would-be aspirants on the Republican side to the White House?
Well, clearly you're seeing China much more aggressive in the past 2 years with the Biden team in the White House. I mean, their joint military exercises with Russia, the aggressiveness with which they are penetrating the airspace and sea space around Taiwan, threatening overflights, around Japan. I mean, the level of activity has grown enormously in the last 2 years. So to what do we attribute that? I mean, it's got to be their view or perspective of the United States. There's nothing to worry about or fear. They're taking advantage of the opportunities provided by the Biden team, I think. So I think former President Trump is correct in that how China interacted with the U.S. was much different when he was in the White House. And if you remember back, the tariffs, to impose some kind of a trade penalty on China with their currency manipulation, cyber espionage, theft of U.S. intellectual property, IP theft, those sorts of things. So it's a night and day difference between how China viewed the United States and its activities between the Trump and the Biden administrations. I think that is very true.
And what did you make, or what should we understand about the reports in the last couple of weeks of war games put on by the United States, in which almost invariably in a conflict with China, the United States comes out on the losing end? Does that speak to military preparedness, or or should we not place that much stock in those war games that are done relatively routinely?
No, I think it's important, and I was part of an office some years ago, so I do know that there are some components of the military that for a couple of decades have been looking at the contest between China and the United States, and it's never really been in the U.S. favor on these outcomes. These war games are getting more report in the last year. CSIS, which is a think tank in D.C., did a whole series of them last summer, and you're on a knife's edge in terms of U.S. winning on behalf of or in league with Taiwan, and it's time and distance and capacity. So let's say we've got 300 ships in the Navy, which we do. Only about 60 of those are deployed on any given day into the Western Pacific. Meanwhile, China has 350 ships, and all the land-based stuff that you can bring to bear against naval forces. It's like 6,000-7,000 miles away from the U.S., so it takes time to cross that distance to reinforce any kind of capabilities. So in a numbers and proximity game, all the advantages are in China's favor. And if you wanted to change that, it takes years to build ships and expand your fleet. That takes money. And so you can see where that spiral, starts. So I think it's something very concerning, because it's not just Taiwan. It's, if we had to go to the support of Japan, treaty ally, or the Philippines, treaty ally, or South Korea, how much stuff do we have over that side of the world? How much stuff does China or even North Korea have? And again, distance, time, and numbers all favor our competitors in that part of the world.
We spoke with Gordon Chang last week, of course, a Chinese policy expert, and he suggested to us, I mean, in no uncertain terms, that war with China is coming because an invasion of Taiwan is coming. He wouldn't, commit to a specific timeline, but he made it sound like it was going to be sooner rather than later.
Well, you look at the curve in China demographically, how aged is their population getting, how few young people they have proportionally. Remember the one-child policy that was in place for so many years. So they just don't have enough young people to be workers, support the older population, man their military, and all those sorts of things. So if you think that in China, if things are going to get tougher as they get into the 2030s, and Japan is growing, they're investing in their military, the Philippines has rediscovered a good positive relationship with the United States, these sorts of trend lines. So you can see this kind of closing window of opportunity. China either moves to take Taiwan before they can't. And so there's this window over the next, say, 5, 6, 8 years, where Gordon Chang and others, Phil Davidson, who was the senior military officer for the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific region, there's this thing called the Davidson window as well. And so if you're in Beijing, how much time do I have to take my very top objective, reunifying Taiwan under the Communist Party's rule, before I can't do that because of all the other things that are going on in the world? And so I do think it's a window of risk that the world is seeing, the U.S. is seeing in particular, between now and, say, the 2030 timeframe.
So if and when China invades Taiwan, what should our response be? Should we be doing what we're doing with Ukraine right now by providing funding and military aid?
Well, that would be part of it, but orders of magnitude harder to do that. With Ukraine, we can get stuff to Europe. You have countries that are immediately adjacent to Ukraine. You can roll things in, fly them in, where it might be. How do you do that in Taiwan? I mean, if it's circled by Chinese warships and missiles and aircraft, there are no roads or rail or tunnels going to Taiwan. So everything would have to move by ship, and it makes it very, very difficult to deliver quantity in a rapid period of time. So this is especially one area where you want to keep the war from happening to begin with, or you have to increase your military posture to have a more timely response. So it would be very, very difficult.
Given that, what is China thinking? I mean, I know that they historically play the long game, and that's centuries, not years. But I mean, they could take Taiwan right now, and we wouldn't do anything about it. So why aren't they?
Well, yeah, and so there's this argument about when does China feel that it is militarily ready. It's expanding, it's training, doing a lot of testing flights, it's probing Taiwan. They fly planes, China flies planes into Taiwan airspace. How does Taiwan respond? What radars light up? Do they have tracking systems for anti-aircraft radars? Do they fly their own planes? And so all this response is being tracked, and it's really in Beijing's court to decide when they feel they are ready enough relative to Taiwanese readiness, American attention and readiness. I think it's a good opportunity for them to move much, much sooner. But because of our support to Ukraine, munitions inventories are lower. There's a lot of attention and money that have been applied against Europe and not the Indo-Pacific. So, it's a relative advantage that's also important. But this thing with Taiwan, from the Communist Party standpoint, it is their biggest priority. Second, maybe only to certainly the survival of the Communist Party, right? So they're controlled domestically within China. and then second is taking Taiwan. And I don't think that on our side of the pond we really appreciate how important and objective this is for Xi Jinping and his apparatchiks.
All right, moving to the Trump indictment. And look,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying the U.S. shouldn't have laws protecting state secrets. Okay.
Sure.
However, after Fawn Hall and Sandy Berger and David Petraeus and Edward Snowden
Right.
and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Jack Teixeira, are we really hiding anything from America's enemies or just her taxpayers?
I think taxpayers. I think that's a great point. Yeah, everybody else seems to know what's going on except you and me. I mean, paying our taxes and all that. So, justice should be applied equally to everyone. So, is this particular case against Trump political? Absolutely. It's because Trump is Trump, and you got the Biden folks in the White House and those sorts of things. But it doesn't mean that Trump may have done something illegal, in retaining classified documents or whatever that might be. I mean, we don't know because it hasn't gone through in the showing of evidence, but it seems to indicate or to imply that there was something handled in a way that should have been handled. So because the Department of Justice did not pursue Hillary Clinton when they absolutely should have, private servers and double dipping into funds and all the chicanery that is associated with both Clintons during their time in government, doesn't absolve anybody else from also, doing something wrong or inappropriate or what have you. So I think the hypocrisy here, which colors all of this, is why pursue Trump when we haven't pursued, Strzok and the FBI officials, the Steele dossier, business, the Russian collusion hoax. I mean, all those other sorts of things I think are a legitimate complaint by Donald Trump. Why was the system always pursuing him and everybody else gets off scot-free?
Right.
So where
Right.
average citizens like you and me really get angry is the inequity in these sorts of things.
No, exactly right. And even the specifics, like just a specific example, since this is what's being much talked about right now. This a recorded conversation where he is alleged to be waving around a battle plan to invade Iran that was drafted by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley. So let's just say that's true. Let's just say he was. And by the way, there's no assertion that he provided it to anybody or that he was sneaking documents to foreign enemies or anything like that.
Yeah.
He's waving around and he's being silly. Let's say that was that, or reckless, a little worse than silly.
Right.
Reckless. Does Iran not know about the battle plan we have for them? We talk? I'm sure we're talking to Israel about the Middle East and about what we could conceive these. I mean, am I being naive to say that, or maybe cynical? Actually, the opposite. Am I being cynical to say that our nation's enemies more or less know what we would do if we decided to do it?
Well, there are only so many things that can be done, right? So if you look at Iran, what are the land approaches? What is sea? What is the airspace? So it's not like this secret kingdom, clouded in mystery in the land of Mordor or what have you, So, but how you specifically go about the sequencing, the totality, do you go cyber and the missiles and the tanks or whatever that might be? So, yes, I think it's a mixture of yes and no. On the one hand, everybody knows that the U.S. tries to plan for all these potential, scenarios. Any plan that is on the books is a starting point. It gives you something to use to initiate things, but then those are always modified, based on actual availability, what your enemy is actually doing. So there are always these points of departure. So what is the goodness of the plan in terms of revealing some kind of secrets? There's some issues there, but it's going to change anyway. But then you have the actual legality of if the legal guidelines of the directives are something is marked secret or top secret or whatever, you aren't supposed to be blabbing about it, right? So you've got two issues here,
right.
Is adherence to guidelines, directives, and then the reality of how much harm would actually be done if you aren't revealing like a source. A spy in a particular place. You wouldn't want to lose that person. Or a method. Did you use a satellite to collect something in a certain way that if the enemy knew that, they would cut off that access, of getting that information. So sources and methods, one thing. Here are the guidelines is something else. The actual reality of somebody knowing something about a better plan, perhaps not quite as important because of how things change over time.
He is Dakota Wood, served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps, Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks as always.
Great. Super.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Hi, this is Steve. I'm in Italy, away from my business. But I'm not worried about the office or my absence from it. I'm confident because I've got Turnkey on my side. They've helped me solve several problems for my business, so I can finally relax for a bit while I let the business